We'll just begin. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you got some coffee for the last panel of the day. Welcome back to the second segment of this really interesting panel called Politics and Policy, Rethinking Systems and Strategies in Higher Education. We have four speakers. I think our first speaker is not yet online, so we'll actually move on to the second paper. Maria and Helga, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, that's quick.
I think
That's a quick
because
intro.
our first presenter is not here yet. So if you don't mind, we could probably just begin with yours. Your paper is called Progress in the Implementation of National Strategy on the Social Dimension of Higher Education in Austria, what promotes and what challenges the process. So over to you. You have 15 minutes, and then we have 5 minutes for Q&A.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Vienna. Thank you for having our input in this conference. My name is Helga Posset. I'm a policy officer in the Federal Ministry of Women, Science and Research in Austria, and together with my head of department, Maria Keplinger, we're going to talk about the progress in the implementation of our national strategy on the social dimension of higher education in Austria. And I should, do you already see the presentation? No.
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Okay. That's strange because it does. It's different here now.
You want
What
to?
do you see?
Want...
No, do you
Yeah,
see
we can
full
see.
presentation mode?
We can see your first slide.
Okay, good. So, what promotes and what challenges the process? We've just to give you a very quick overview of the Austrian higher education system. We have 4 different sectors of higher education, 77 institutions, with the majority of students in the big blue part. These are the public universities. Not going to go into detail here. The national strategy was developed in 2015 with a strong political commitment to have a national strategy on the social dimension based on the Yerevan commitment of the Bologna process, if I can put it very, very short. We started the process with all the stakeholders in the field, and we did 9 workshops throughout 2016, and in 2017 we published the paper and launched it in a huge networking conference with the higher education institutions and all the higher education stakeholders. The timeline you can see, we've had strong influence of the COVID pandemic, of course, and then as foreseen, we did a midterm evaluation, and now after 8 years later, we're doing the final evaluation of the strategy. We sort of did what we called mainstreaming the social dimension, so tried to put the social dimension, the topic in all higher education steering mechanisms and development plans. What does this strategy look like? Just a very brief overview. We identified 3 target dimensions, 2 sort of along the student life cycle, to look into all details and all issues students at higher education institutions are confronted with. And the 3rd dimension looks at the higher education systems. What do we as a ministry have to look at? Where do we have to change things in? For instance, how do we have to develop further our student support scheme? No strategy without targets, quantitative targets. They're put very placative here. So to increase the number of educationally disadvantaged students, you see wide and inclusive access. These are very tailor-made to the Austrian higher education system. For example, what do we mean by promote equal opportunity in medicine studies? Especially in medicine, in human medicine, but also in dentistry, we have not a good mix of the students. There, it is very unlikely for someone with a lower educational background to get into these studies. So we'd like to address that as well. In the years, we identified a few successes, a lot of challenges, but a few successes. One being that we think that the strategy is a very supportive narrative. Representatives of higher education institutions, when asked for the interim evaluation, said having a strategy is very supportive when it comes to your own measures, to what you want to do at your own higher education institutions. We've had a number of initiatives and reforms of the student support system. I'd say the most important was the valorization of study grants, and also that a higher number of students received these grants. One success for which a lot of people internationally envy us is that we managed to put into the legislation and into the performance agreements with the public universities a budget retainment of 0.5% of the global budget of a public university if no measures regarding the social dimension, or if no strategy is being developed and implemented. And this can be quite a considerable amount of money. Regarding the universities of applied sciences, we are also we have an anchor in the funding and development plan. There are gender and diversity competence centers established at the university colleges for teacher education, and we've some improvements in the recognition of prior learning. We also do quite a number of dissemination events and networking. We've established the annual networking conferences for the higher education community, and I think this won't go away in the near future. We have different topics we address each year and follow that up with documentation, but also put the social dimension profiles of the higher education institutions on our website. And if one institution does that, the others want to be present there as well. So, and we do some, we take part in international PLAs. I've listed a few, and here I would like to hand over to Maria Keplinger for the challenges. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helga. Good afternoon, also from my side. Well, Helga focused on implementation successes. I have to focus on challenges in the implementation of the national strategy on social dimension in higher education. I would like to focus on three challenges. The first one is a so-called implementation gap. The second one is multiple societal challenges in the third mission of higher education institutions. And the third challenge is the influence of the preceding educational pathway. So let me now come to the so-called implementation gap. We can observe a really high increase in the numbers of social dimension measures done by higher education institutions. We had about 170 reported measures reported from higher education institutions when we started with our strategy. And in the midterm evaluation 2021, we had 750 reported measures. So there is really an increase in the number of social dimension measures. But all these manifold measures have limited structural and systemic effects, and we call that the implementation gap. What is needed is to analyze the effectiveness, efficiency, and range of measures, monitoring the measures, have to implement a better quality assurance regarding the measures, and so on. Our midterm evaluation has shown that there is a strategic anchoring of the social dimension at almost all higher education institutions. There are service units, diversity management units, and student support centers, and so on. But the interaction between bottom-up and top-down initiatives is not the best, and mainstreaming the social dimension is necessary at the entire university or higher education institution. Helga, next slide, please. The second challenge there are a lot of challenges, but the second challenge I would like to focus on is that there are multiple societal challenges in the third mission of universities. Schneiderwind, he is a German higher education researcher. He stated that the third mission should become the first mission of higher education institutions. Means that societal challenges should be the starting point for research, teaching, and learning processes. What we can observe is that third mission activities become increasingly relevant for higher education institutions. But there are multiple crises, multiple challenges that have to be addressed as priorities. Digitalization, artificial intelligence, globalization, climate change, competition for funds, foreign interference, academic freedom, and so on. And the point is, are the resources enough to address all these challenges as priorities, or have some challenges be addressed first, and so on. What is clear is that there are synergies of measures addressing the social dimensions, gender, diversity, equity, or the sustainable development goals. But what is clear as well is that there is a tension between equity, inclusion, participation measures at higher education institutions, and this approach for excellence, exclusivity, meritocracy. It's sometimes said that the one hinders the other or is a contradict to the others. The third challenge I'd like to focus on is the influence of the preceding educational pathway. Helga has mentioned it. We will not achieve our quantitative targets by 2025 in almost all indicators. Reasons, therefore, are a short observation period, the impact of the COVID pandemic, maybe the targets were too ambitious, and so on. But and most of the targets focus the need to focus on the preceding educational pathway, which we could not address in our national strategy of the social dimension of higher education. The national strategy we have may overestimate the effect of social dimension measures at higher education institutions, but what we are saying that higher education institutions sometimes or often underestimate the effects of social dimension agenda setting related to societal impact. Higher education influences preceding educational levels. Teacher training is done at higher education institutions, universities. There is a lot of outreach, a lot of addressing the interface of school and higher education. There is education research, pedagogics, and so on. There is a high potential of students with non-academic parents and also with non-traditional pathways in secondary education. And these groups would especially profit from a better or more targeted counseling and information, mentoring, and inclusive practices. So let me now summarize. We had, with our strategy, we had a successful agenda setting through a high political commitment and I would say a high stakeholder involvement. We have successes, for example, in steering public universities with that budget retainment. Helga Possett has mentioned it. We have a lot of data available. We have international, national dissemination and networking. Yes, it could be improved, sure. And what are our next steps? Our higher education institutions, they can build upon existing diversity or social dimension relevant measures. We have a lot of cooperation with schools, information and counseling services, and so on. But a focus on systematic and structural effects is needed. It's not only to set some measures, the measures, the quality of the measures should be improved regarding systematic and structural effects. Then we need a stronger focus on non-traditional educational biographies, non-traditional pathways, for example, a better recognition, validation of non-formal educational achievements, foster micro-credentials, and so on. A revision of curricula and teaching provision is needed to have a better compatibility between studies and other responsibilities of students, for example, childcare obligation or work besides studies, e-learning, more childcare offers, and so on. Obligatory diversity trainings in staff development, that was also a recommendation in our midterm evaluation, but it's not really discussed in Austria. I think we have to focus on that in our relaunch of the strategy. That's the one of the last points. We will start with a relaunch of the strategy this year. We hope in the end of 2025 when we have finished our final evaluation, and the relaunch of the strategy also could help to promote the implementation of the social dimension, and keep mainstreaming the social dimension. That's clear. means that social dimension has to be included in all higher education strategies. So thank you for your attention, and maybe we have time for some questions. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria and Helga. We do have time for questions, so I open it up to the floor for questions. People online can also ask questions. If you could just raise your hand or put it in the chat. Any questions from the room? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the challenges was about the sort of counter argument you were getting in terms of diversity being in opposition to excellence. I was wondering if you'd come up with any strategies for overcoming that argument, or if you'd been successful in kind of arguing that diversity can lead to excellence rather than that it has to be in conflict.
Yeah, yeah, but thank you for that question. I think that's really one of the things I can't answer. We observe that when we just bring that point, yeah, the tension between equity and excellence, when we bring that point on the agenda, when we try to discuss it, there is a lot of emotion, and universities tell us that there is not a tension between excellence and equity, but we know that this meritocratic approach in research and higher education is, I would say, so we have this gender blindness, and there is also this social dimension blindness. Yeah, we can observe it, but how to overcome it? Yes, I don't know. Helga, would you or could you have a better answer?
No, I'm afraid I don't have. It's a constant. It comes up constantly, and we don't really have the answer. We've been looking for this. We wanted to have this as a topic for one of our networking conferences, but in the end, we couldn't. We just couldn't do it.
But do you have ideas how to can better link these two approaches, equity and excellence? Is there anybody who could help us to link it, to better link it? Do you have examples, good practices, how to do it?
I mean, I think there are studies that are sometimes cited sort of in making that argument, but in slightly different or specific contexts. So there's some to do with scientific research. I think there's a paper in Nature that sort of tries to argue that the more diverse your lab is, the better quality your research. But obviously that's specific to the sciences. And there's similar studies in terms of business. So the diversity of your board can lead to better outcomes from a business perspective. So I think some people might be convinced by those arguments, but other people might say, you know, HE is different, or the humanities is different, or something like that. So
yeah, thank you. We have these studies as well. Just recently, we've had something on the boards in Austria as well, but no specific research with regard to higher education. So yet to be done.
Yeah, we have one more
mean,
question.
just thinking out loud, I wonder, like, if we have to interrogate what we mean by excellence in that context a bit more, because perhaps it's and thinking through kind of the social sciences and the human sciences, it seems to me that equity isn't just about pushing excellence, but also changing the kind of knowledge and research that we want to do. And we're saying that if there are barriers that stop some people being involved in that research, actually, it's not about excellence. It's not about kind of the robustness of such of that research. It's about the representativeness of the knowledge making. And equity, therefore, is a pathway to changing the qualitative nature of the research that's being undertaken. And actually, that might have, that will involve excellence in some ways, but also that's a kind of broader question than excellence in social science research.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I have another question. I think in one of the slides you mentioned that the national strategy might overestimate the effects of the social dimension measures, while higher education institutions underestimate the effects. So there's like this tension. So I was wondering if you could sort of unpack that a little bit.
Slide
Yeah.
11.
I think this was on this 11th slide.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. The point is that in the Austrian situation, but I think that's not only the Austrian situation. The point is that our higher education institutions, universities, they have societal responsibility. That's one of they have to do research and teaching, and they have this societal responsibility, and it's the third mission, whatever, and in my experience, universities, they are very clear, focusing on research and higher education, education of students, but it's not so clear to focus on this societal responsibility, and it's not so clear how to reach or to have a concept of the impact of this societal responsibility of higher education institutions, and the influencing the preceding educational pathway. Higher education institutions, I tried to mention, have a lot of tools for that, but they underestimate the effects of the tools. Yeah, teacher training, for example, should really be understood as a tool to also to improve the social dimension in primary and secondary school, but that's not the main point in teacher education. It's often said, yeah, teacher training is something, whatever, but it could be used also to improve the social dimension. The same is all the research findings regarding pedagogics or education research. It could be used, much more used in measures to improve the school system or this preceding educational pathways. Is that answer?
Yes,
Some-
thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? Because then we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you so much, Helga and Maria, for bringing in the Austrian perspective. We are yet to have Mario joining us, so we can move on to our third speaker, Naomi. Would you be happy to? Naomi's paper is called Equity at a Crossroad, Rethinking Private Provision in Ghana's Higher Education. Do you have a presentation?
Yeah.
I'll show you a screen. Yeah, I'm just trying to get the presentation.
Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, and our participants online and in person. So, my paper is titled Equity at a Crossroads. This paper, pardon me, I'm a lawyer, a lecturer at Accra Metropolitan University, and the current deputy CEO of Ghana Tourism Development Company. However, today I present not just on official capacity, but from lived reflection, institutional engagement, and a deep concern for what's been lost in Ghana's educational history. So, looking at Ghana's current educational landscape, we see that it has structural imbalance. Taking a dive, we see that it comprises of 16 accredited public universities, 91 accredited private higher education institutions, out of which 24 are chartered private ones. Now, juxtaposing this with the current gross enrollment ratio globally, we see that 2023 statistics show that it was 40.35%. Ghana being far below at 21.99%. The private sector, however, absorbing only 11% of this, while the public sector absorbed 89% of tertiary student enrollment. There is a critical paradox here, because the rationale behind private universities bulk of the time is that they're to complement the inadequacies of public higher education institutions. Now, the structural constraints facing private universities in Ghana are charter and accreditation delays, rigid affiliation requirements. Prior to the new Education Regulatory Bodies Act in 2020, the requirement was 10 years to be affiliate to a mentor institution prior to being able to get your accreditation. This was on paper. Informally, it took most private higher institutions much longer. Post 2020, we see that they reduced it to 4 years, with a 2-year likelihood of extension for institutions showing some progress. Private higher education institutions also suffer funding constraints and policy-induced distortions, as well as negative public perception. The synthesis of these structural constraints is that there's an environment created where innovation is penalized, diversity suppressed, and survival is largely required on isomorphism and mimicking mentor institutions. So there was a central question emanating from this study. This was, what are the systemic barriers affecting growth of private higher education institutions? The objectives that flow from this are, one, to ascertain changes in student enrollment rates from 2019 to 2024. Within the same time frame, examine the trends in faculty attrition and institutional staffing. Then, to evaluate the effects of recent policies on private universities in Ghana. To also analyze regulatory frameworks affecting institutional autonomy, and lastly, to propose reforms to strengthen private higher education institutions. Now, this study largely relied on two main theories, which was the public good theory and coercive isomorphism. I chose public good theory because this is the normative rationale that states employ when funding higher education institutions. I also relied on coercive isomorphism because this was a general term that explained broadly what private higher education institutions go through. They tend to mimic their mentor institutions or mimic dominant models to gain legitimacy. Now, these frameworks show the public-private differentiation in Ghana higher education. This is not organic, it's structured, shaped, and quite often distorted by state priorities, regulatory enforcement, and public narratives. So this research, I think it's quite unusual, but I went for qualitative design and had some support from descriptive statistics. The goal was not to be statistically generalizable, but to rather be able to spot trends that otherwise qualitative data would not have allowed me to. I also relied on multiple data sources, institutional reports, key informant interviews, questionnaires that mimicked my interview guide, and policy reviews. I also relied on purposive sampling, choosing 7 institutions based on accreditation status, geographic diversity, ownership models, and academic focus. Now, my findings for this study were that private higher education institutions in Ghana suffer enrollment disparities. Looking at the data presented, we see that private higher education institutions had 20% of student enrollment in 2012, but in 2023, there was a drop, a sharp dive to 11%. They also suffer a negative public perception, sometimes being viewed as academically inferior. They also seem to have high faculty attrition rates, or what I like to term as structural brain drain. They also suffered having to forego their unique identity to meet regulatory demands. Quite obvious is funding exclusion. So private higher education institutions tend to be largely excluded from state funding mechanisms. These 5 interlinked findings are what I call equity displacement effect. This is where policies that are designed to expand access exclude the very institutions that could support and deepen access. So looking at finding 1 in seriatim, the data revealed something quite interesting to me. So when I started this study, I was very fixated on what I thought was the problem. And what I thought was the problem was all private higher education institutions in Ghana suffer the same fate: dwindling admissions and enrollment trends, high faculty attrition rates. Interestingly, my findings were quite undulating. So I found that institutions that had multidisciplinary approaches, incorporating undergraduate levels all the way to doctoral levels, experienced the steepest declines in student enrollments. Faith-based universities, however, were quite stable, not too low, not too high, just quite stable. But interestingly, health-focused institutions, I forgot to add, and institutions that offered postgraduate degrees only, actually had appreciating student enrollment levels. I also realized that the concept of fee-paying streams, so in Ghana typically, university tuition should not cost the student that much. However, public institutions came up with a concept called fee-paying streams, where students who otherwise may not have met the cut get to pay fees and get admitted into the same course. Now, these fee-paying streams accommodate excess demand and create a paradox where private universities are outcompeted. On the faculty attrition rates, we see that there were high turnover rates, with some institutions I interviewed having as high as 22% in some places. Some of the likely problems from the interviews I gathered were remuneration gaps. So in private higher education institutions, senior lecturers on average earned about 5,000 Ghana cedis. However, in the same position in a public institution, they were earning about 9,000 Ghana cedis for starts. There were also the obvious career advancement limitations. Who wouldn't want to be a professor? However, in private higher education institutions without charter status, they cannot promote faculty beyond certain academic ranks. This consequently creates frustration among qualified professionals. The coping mechanisms as well were that private higher education institutions relied largely on adjunct scholars and also contract-based hiring, some having a year renewable every single year. There was also the institutional autonomy aspect, where because of the regulatory framework in Ghana, private universities had to operate under a lot of external controls, and they had very little strategic independence because of that. An interesting term coined by one of the interviewees was academic colonization, where public mentors impose curriculum design, approve faculty qualifications, and moderate final assessments, which limited institutional innovation. Quite tedious was the dual reporting obligations, where institutions had to report to their mentor institutions, but at the same time reported the same things to Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, which is quite of a bureaucratic mishap, should I call it? There was also the fact that in the charter transition process, there were unclear programmatic benchmarks. Eligibility requirements were very uncertain. You wouldn't even know when you met them because it was the prerogative of your mentor institution. Many institutions tended to report little to no feedback, or the timelines for charter approval were very uncertain. Now, trying to understand why the accreditation process is such a big deal, I'd like to take everyone through the steps. So we have internal quality assurance processes, where the programs have to pass through institutional vetting processes. Then the mentor university have to give endorsement to their affiliate institutions. Then the final validation comes from Ghana Tertiary Education Commission. And of course, usually there's a waiting period for some up to 18 months for just new programs.
The presentation is ongoing. Yeah, okay. I'm not...
Out of this study, I coined a term called assimilative conformity syndrome. It had 3 strands to it. It had what I call strategic affiliation dependence. Here, institutions could go for charter but refused to go for charter because they felt, based on public perceptions, inferior academic quality perceptions, students wanting public university awarded degrees who couldn't get in would rather meet that market demand by refusing to charter and actually maintaining their status as an affiliate institution, despite all the hurdles that they encounter. I also, for the second strand, have recursive regulatory assimilation. Here, private institutions have to alter themselves to mirror public universities as a preemptive strategy for approval. This is not organic, this is reactive. Lastly, policy-induced identity suppression. Here, institutions have to surrender distinctiveness in favor of compliance with expected standards from their public mentors. My final finding is what I call the equity displacement effect. Here, state-led interventions, which were otherwise intended to promote equity, because of the nature of these interventions, disadvantage students away from private institutions. An example is a recent one done in Ghana, the free first-year tuition, where the first year of students in universities is going to be taken care of by the government. Now, the problem with this is, for private institutions, is that even if a university is charging the same amount, with the view that private universities are seen as elitist or expensive, the fact that you forego your first year of fees makes it look like the more plausible and cheaper option. Another thing is that students will go to congested public universities because of the funding availability. Now, a key issue I observed was that there were beautiful policies and interventions which favored public institutions. However, there was little to no enhancement of fiscal capacity or infrastructural development to meet the growing demand for public universities. This led to mass overcrowding of a lot of public institutions. Now, another aspect I discovered in the interviews was structural underfinancing. So we realized that there were, for all the institutions I interviewed, 0% of them had public infrastructure financing. We have something we call the Student Loan Trust Fund in Ghana. 2 out of 7 of the institutions I interviewed had functional desks for this. And of course, the faculty attrition rates that we have discussed. Now, to conclude, the study in no way seeks to portray private higher education institutions as perfect, but this study insists that they're essential. This study also insists that looking at education as a public good, it argues that private higher education institutions do offer that because they're able to accommodate marginalized groups, groups that are location restricted, groups that otherwise would not have been able to have access to higher education, and that supports the equity agenda. It also posits that if we leave these issues unaddressed, the way the education trajectory is going in the higher education scene may render private higher education institutions odious. My recommendations are to reframe private higher education as a public good, to develop differentiated academic accreditation pathways, to expand student-centric financing, to also establish a national graduate employability index. This is to debunk negative stereotypes about private higher education institution graduates. To also formulate a higher education equity compact, and to clarify the charter process. Once again, my name is Naomi Alabi. Thank you very much for your audience.
Interesting. It seems to me that lots of what you pointed to, the unintended consequences of these initiatives that sort of are making it really hard for private universities to make it worthwhile getting accredited. Ashesi would seem to be an example of a university that bucks that. So can you tell us a bit about why that one has worked and built status, and is that simply because of the amount of external funding it has?
Well, one, they've positioned themselves quite well when it comes to external funding, which is quite key as well in development of private higher education institutions. Another thing I think is their vertical differentiation. So they've been able to position themselves as a private institution that goes beyond the average perception of a private institution. It's almost like a Harvard in Ghana, if you see that. So they've differentiated quite well. They've branded a very solid quality. They've been able to also come up with unique courses in every sector. So for the first time in Ghana, we have an LLB program with public policy. Since I've been alive, it's just been straight LLBs, nothing new. So they've been able to kind of break barriers with Ghana Tertiary Education Commission when it comes to being innovative. I think they also, unlike other private higher education institutions, have space to operate because they tend to have a larger bargaining power. Which is also quite key when you're dealing with regulatory bodies of that nature. So yes, I would say Ashesi has differentiated quite well.
Well, I guess it's not a fair one to raise because of the amount of money and its international profile.
It's quite huge funding, yes.
I was thinking, sorry.
Okay. I will just make it.
It's okay.
Okay, well, I thought there was lots of super interesting information in there. I suppose the kind of question I have is, how do you think these private institutions need to be regulated? If your kind of take at the moment is lots of the regulation is weighing them down, is bureaucratic, and is inefficient, we equally know that if they're left kind of to their entire own devices, we see similar pictures to perhaps in Latin America where, that provision doesn't end up being good quality. So how would you, in an ideal world, what would be the things that they need to be held accountable for?
So I propose adaptive regulation rather than deregulation. I do think that there can be certain yardsticks of evaluation, for example, the mission of the institution, rather than a one size fits all kind of metric, which is the issue we're dealing with at the moment. A lot of the time, institutions with unique mandates have to alter themselves and kind of, this solid concept of isomorphism, because sameness is one way or another equated to quality. But I would argue that sameness is not quality in any way, shape, or form. I think that once you're able to put some conditionality, that ensures accountability. So I would say that adaptive accreditation, looking at core mandates of institutions, could be the way to go.
I was gonna follow up on the quasi-market thing. It's like, how could you regulate that? I guess it's quite similar to what he has asked. But some issues might arise when you create a quasi-market with some kind of regulation and the independent budgeting, like what Thatcher did for the local management goes. But I was thinking about something else, like you were talking about isomorphism. I was wondering if that's the influence within Ghana, or is it from external worlds, from being colonized, or the problem of decolonizing, the whole thing of being chartered and then being the idea of the sameness. Is that a history behind it?
I would say it does have some historical antecedents to it, but I wouldn't want to blame it so much on history because society is designed to evolve. But this is one of the things you observe when society refuses to evolve, and meet the current disposition. So yes, historical antecedents may have had some contribution to how it's being shaped, but there is a mandate on Ghana Tertiary Education Commission and public higher education institutions to go beyond the old school, rigorous, methodical, should I say, everything looking the same kind of, because, another thing I observed, like I schooled in the UK, and my friends in the US, for example, someone would choose a university because they teach maybe computer science with specific subjects that other institutions don't have. So if you're coming to a country and every computer science program has like hardware components, software components, this, that, and there's nothing to differentiate, it adversely also impacts the national working population, because sometimes you want to have 5 computer science people in a department where one person is really good at this, another person is really good at this, but you're also having isomorphism in the skill sets in the Ghanaian workforce as well. So it has an adverse ripple effect if you say sameness is equivalent to quality.
Do you think the dominant discourse is like shifting from like, people liking the sameness, or like, are people trying to evolve now, or is it still not really evolving?
I would say younger academics are pushing for that, whereas the more traditional academics really like the status quo as it is. So it is a generational battle as well, I would say.
Any more questions or comments? People online could also ask questions. You can just raise your hand or put it in the chat. Thank you so much for your really comprehensive paper. You've got some compliments on the chat. Okay, we do have one question which has just come in. So Naomi, maybe you could take that. It says, when looking at Ghana and its way of management in higher education sectors, what can be an option to consider when looking at making its system more effective to help your observation become effective and successful in the Ghanaian workforce?
I do think inclusive roundtable discussions would be the way to go as well, prior to any sort of policy implementations, that sort of thing, because then you kind of get to have different perspectives prior to enacting anything. So yeah, I would say inclusive discourse would be one way to go.
So much. Thank you. I also loved how you had policy recommendations at the end of your presentation. That was very helpful. I think two of our speakers are not present. Can I quickly check if Noreen is online?
She was here, actually.
She was? Noreen, can
Yes.
you hear us?
Yes,
Perfect.
I am. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
Noreen, if you're ready, you could please start.
Yes, of course. I will share my screen. Mhm.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So while presenting, I will just keep the camera off. Then during question answer, I will start again.
Sure,
Thank you.
sure, whatever works for you. Go ahead, Noreen.
Hello everyone. This is Naureen Yasmin. I'm currently a graduate student here in the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. I'm doing an MPhil master's program here in quantitative method. So today I'm going to present on the admission quota system in Bangladesh higher education. So so the title of my presentation, you can see like re-examining the admission quota system in Bangladesh's higher education, trend, gaps, policy, and implication. So thank you so much for creating this opportunity. Happy to be here. So this is how I organize the discussion today. So I will actually start with some background that recent incidents that happened in my country recently. Like in 2024, there is a huge protest, student protest, and because of the existing quota system for the government job in my country, and that also brought a reform in the admission quota system for the public university enrollment. So it was like back in 2024, it started with like there was 30% allocation of the quota for the descendants of the freedom fighters. As you know, Bangladesh was independent in 1971, and the 30% allocation was for the descendants of freedom fighters. And then in June 2024, there was a High Court ruling, and through that ruling, there was the abolition of the 2018 this quota system and for the job quota, and this overturned actually causes the 2024 July movement, how it is now portrayed, and there was like nationwide student-led movement contributed to a political upheaval and regime change, as you know that Bangladesh currently having an interim government. And the aftermath of that regime change, there was a change, like quite a lot of change in the admission quota system for public university. So in total, when I was checking like how many quota types of quota or for within the public university we have, so like in total there was like in different university there are like different types of practice, and I found that we have 11 types of quota across all the public universities. And when the students start this protest, the reform after the regime change, the reform happened actually for some quota, for like the freedom fighters quota, and there are like ward quota or dependent quota. So this quota is for children of university officers, university teachers and employees, and there are also like chancellor's quota. Like in one university, the vice chancellors also has the mandate to provide admission 20 universities. So these are some practices which actually instigate the students for the quota reform. And there are also some quotas like students with disabilities. There are a quota for underprivileged ethnic minorities. There are quota for Dalit communities. And there are also quota for students who are non-indigenous but living in remote areas, hilly areas. And there are quota for students from tea worker communities. So these are like the background. So this here when the reform happened back in 2024, so the few reform that happened, that the government abolished the vice chancellor's chancellor quota in that particular university, and there was like students were also still protesting for that dependent quota for university teachers and employees, but a conflict started to grow up because then the university employee started protest against that protest. So they want to keep the quota. So these concerns and conflict around the quota system, around the practice of allocation of quota, that actually inspired me to check, okay, let's see how the quota system, existing practice of quota system helped us for the equitable access, or to maintain the equitable access environment within the higher education system, especially public university. So these are some cases that when I was analyzing the documents and also the newspapers and other documents like the malpractices, like for instance, students were mostly complaining about why there are like in medical college admission, which are public medical college, there are like only merit-based admission was only 76 candidates, and to fulfill the other seats under quota allocation, they have to admit other students, like around 193 students who didn't pass the merit criteria. So this is the admissions situation in 2024-2025. Similarly, different university has different practice. There was like no uniformity. That's for sure we have now in our quota system. Like one of the university, they actually change the pass criteria, the benchmark to pass the admission test. And it was there within their administration, and there is no like discussion or discourse with the central administration of higher education. And also when there are still in some cases, especially for the major public universities, students are still protesting for the complete abolition of the dependent quota. And all this situation, all these incidents actually raise the concern, like how actually the whole quota system or the allocation of quota practice is maintained and done. And then so when I started checking data, so I found that so these changes happened like within 9 months. So before 2024 July movement, there was like indigenous quota for like 5%, and there was like a quota for students with disability 1%, and also students from Dalit community, they are like 1%. Like because of the student protest, like the administration was like they have been forced to change the quota, and now we have 1% quota for students with disability, students from indigenous community, and suddenly there is this 4% decrease. I must mention that all these changes actually not any evidence based. It's like heat of the moment, I would say, how because of the protest they are changing the situation, and there was like no written document or written evidence-based analysis, like why there was 5% quota before and now why we are going for 1% quota. That's another reason I wanted to explore this impact, the effect of existing quota system that we have now. So just to give the context, like we have around more than 50 indigenous group here in Bangladesh, and so when they are making this 1% quota, their main rationale was like still, even if we give 5% quota, there are unfilled empty quota seats. So that's another issue why they use this reason as to take the quota, decrease the quota at 1%. And now these are some still like this conflicting scenario, like students are still asking for, mostly students from the indigenous community, they perceive, they think like the existing quota, the reduction of quota actually will impact them negatively. And and when even if there are like 5% quota or 1% quota, still the students of indigenous group who are lagging behind within the indigenous community, they will not be able to get access. That's what they are claiming now. So this is the situation. But also in document, in policy papers, there are some structural problem. Like in the constitutions, we are saying like there should be equality of opportunity for all citizens. Yeah, we are saying like there should be special provisions for backward sections. And the intention is to ensure like adequate representation of this marginalized community. And so this allocation of quota might look like it might have this, it resembles a token just for the token of gesture. The intention is not actually increase the representation meaningfully, effectively. So, and also some of the malpractices because of the other quota, the incidents of other quota, like one of the students quoted like allocating quota for freedom fighters' descendants, for grandchildren of freedom fighters, it's illogical. Also allocating quota for university teachers, students, it's illogical. That's how the existing discourse is now, who are beneficiaries of quota system. So I started my research question was like how this existing quota system influence the equitable access to higher education in Bangladesh, particularly in terms of enrollment trends among the targeted demographic groups. So I focus on indigenous students, I focus on data on Dalit community students, I focus on students from particularly like lower income level families. And then another questions I address, it's like what are the limitations and gaps in the national higher education enrollment data sets in Bangladesh, and how do these affect the ability to evaluate the impact of the quota system and other equity policies. So I to address this situation, at first I follow Nancy Fraser's theory of social justice, where she explaining the three dimension of justice, like there should be redistribution, like fair allocation of resources, where and there should be the diverse identities and the marginalized communities will get recognition within the mainstream discourse, and there will be representation of all diverse groups. And then along with that, for the policy analysis, I also used the BALLS framework like to analyze how this current practices, how the perception about policy, how the implication of policy, equity policy, is being shaped by the power, political, institutional dynamics. So for higher education enrollment, we have two national entities. We have University Grant Commissions. We have Bangladesh Education Statistics Department. Both of them do collect data on national enrollment at different levels and also at higher education level. So I try to find whether we have, I try to go through these data sets, try to find these data sets. I must inform that I didn't find the data sets because they don't open the data sets publicly. I find the reports. So all the analysis I did for this paper, it's based on the statistics I find on these reports. So I'll discuss more than on this issue more. And I did the meta-analysis of these statistics. I tried to find a trend. I did a trend analysis. And also I try to analyze qualitatively the existing reports, newspaper, from different blogs, the policy documents on quota system. There are not many, to get the existing discourse. So I will start with actually addressing the second research question first, because the first kind of limitation when I start this data collection or data analysis, I found there is like a huge data gap in terms of if I want to find those demographic groups who are the beneficiaries of quota. So there is like complete absence of this disaggregated data from official government source. I also teach in a university. So at university level, I know that in the admission form, the students have to mention whether they are from Dalit community, whether they are from indigenous community, or their income level. But interestingly, when in the national level report, there is no mention of indigenous community, indigenous students, the percentage of male students, female students. There are total percentage. There are like district-wise percentage. There are university-wise percentage. But there is like no disaggregated data for this community. So I try to find individual reports that has been done, individual studies that has been done on indigenous students, on Dalit students. I couldn't find any on Dalit community or so I focused on indigenous community students as a case study. In my later part of this presentation, you will find most of the analysis is based on those indigenous community. So indigenous community represents approximately 1.8% of Bangladesh population, and there is like 3.5 or to 5.5 million population. Like there are the different statistics I found in different reports, which is another interesting findings, because there is like no national data. These are like individual studies where I found this statistics. So there are some structural problems. So I found there are no standardized indigenous identification system in higher education. There are so the data collected at admission level, but it is not systematically aggregated or reported centrally, like by the University Grant Commission or by the National Education Statistics Department. And then from my experience, I know that individual universities has that data, because they have their individual respective management of quota system independently, because they have to, because of this policy on quota, they have to identify individual indigenous students, Dalit students. So they have their quota management of quota system managing independently without any connection with the centralized data sharing. So there was like no way how I can assess the effect of the existing quota policy. So we need that aggregated data to assess, evaluate the policy effectiveness. So and this ultimately prevent the evidence-based studies on educational equity, or if we want to infer evidence-based policy decision. And also at individual university level, there is no tracking of diversity progress. They have the data on individuals, indigenous students, Dalit students, but there are like no further analysis of using those data to track the progress in diversity. And so the way based on Fraser's three dimension of justice. So this absence of data, actually we can, this can be portrayed as a systematic in exclusions. Because when they are not in this centralized data system, the indigenous community, the Dalit community, so it doesn't, it that was a limitation of this research, but it also evidence of institutional exclusion. There is like no recognition from the national data set within the national data sets, and therefore they are invisible. They are becoming invisible. There is and recently there is like some you will not find the word indigenous, which is prohibited to use within the national report. You will, yeah, so you will not, and the idea of finding Dalit is another, it's far beyond imagination. So when we don't, when we have this misrecognition, when we have this complete invisibility, so we cannot distribute the resource within equally. We cannot talk about the equitable distribution of resource. So this, how this absence of data, so this is one of the interesting finding that I found, like because of this inequality, because of this invisibility within the national data sets, there is this systematic exclusion of these demographic groups who are actually the beneficiaries of the quota system.
Hi, Maureen. I'm
yes.
having to interrupt you just to keep time. We're actually running over. So if you could just wrap up in the next minute.
Yeah. Yes. I will just finish like this is how the university enrollment was increased. I did some quantitative analysis based on the data we have. Like there is like increase in university in over last 20 years, and increase in number of enrollment. And then when I found sorry. So I use a simulation analysis to see if there was like within the existing data analysis, the simulation was based on a 1.2% assumptions that stays below the 1% quota target for indigenous students. This means like there is like a short, but I found that there is a shortfall about like 80 to 115 students each year, which indicates that there are some barriers for indigenous students that prevent them from meeting the quota target even of 1%. So we are not able to cover the 1% target. So so this led me to ask two questions, like like how this so if indigenous students were enrolled in proportion to their population, what would happen? The numbers could be much higher. It could be like almost double. And this showed that there is actually much more potential if those barriers can be removed. And although the enrollment numbers are increasing, this gap or shortfall has remained like the same for across the group, for the indigenous people and also for the Dalit student. So this means that even though access is expanding within the whole population, equity is not improving. And therefore, we need special policy to close that gap. Lastly, sorry. My final conclusion is we need further exploration on how to implement this mandatory quota targeted groups identity fields within the higher education data sets. We have to have a special monitoring system for the educational attainment of those targeted groups. And we need like separate annual enrollment and progression documentation on those group if we want to see the effects of these quota policies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maureen. We have a few minutes to take maybe about 2 questions or comments. People online could also leave their comments on the chat or raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Like, I really share the difficulty of accessing data. And I think basically part of your argument is we need the data in order to address or start to analyze these inequalities. But actually, we're talking about a state system that, well, I mean, fundamentally doesn't want to recognize the category of indigeneity, right? And so if it's not going to recognize that category, it's just not going to give the data. And so, going through similar questions, part of me starts to think, maybe part of it is about the call to the state to open up these things, but other parts of it is about thinking about data infrastructures that bypass the state, right? What ways, if universities are collecting that information, what other parts of the system could we think about collecting and tracking some of this data that actually doesn't depend on a kind of state apparatus that says, yes, we sanction you to access this, and no, we don't sanction you to access this, based on our politics, basically.
Okay, thank you. Was there any question?
I mean, it's kind of it's a sympathy with the tension, right? Because I understand.
Yes.
It's a really difficult situation to be in, but I think we need to think about ways forward from it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts? Do you want to say anything in response to that, Noreen? Maybe share the difficulties of your research.
That was actually really a good point, like checking how the universities are collecting data based on like through the admission form, that I know, but whether other institutions is doing the similar type of data collection, and whether we can check the data points and maybe some cross tabulation or some cross connection within those data sets, it can happen, like but so far the within the national initiatives, we should like, for me, I think we should push them like more. Maybe we should have discourse to the national within the national initiatives, how, because they have data, but they are not institutionalizing it. But that would have been helped us to understand how, like, actually we are not covering even the 1% quota. Like there is no point of keeping those data secretly, or keeping those data not to shared with anyone. Like having those data would have helped them more meaningfully. Yes.
Sure.
Thank you, Noreen. Very, very helpful. Just a very quick observation and comment. I take the point you're making entirely. When you look at different systems around the world, and maybe this is something that I missed, what's missing here, you tend to also look for some engagement with what I would call a theory of historic compensatory rights. What is it about groups that we're talking about here? And they may not have the same answer, that gives them claim to have those compensatory rights. And essentially, history is the overarching term. There is something in the past, so to speak, which was an injustice or an exclusion or a period of marginalization. We can call it all these things, or some of those things. That then gives right. It was probably the best example one can think of, because it's almost within living memory. The independence from the other part of Pakistan, of course, is a national sort of story, part and parcel of nation building. But it seems to have an expiry date, doesn't it? If people then say, well, what's it going to do with grandchildren rather than children of those freedom fighters? I can go on, but I'm curious, and it's a suggestion to have this sort of sense of historic compensatory rights and how they have a sense of equivalence, both with each other, with different groups, but also with those for whom quotas do not apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I have nothing more to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the presenters and for everyone attending. I think we've had a very diverse set of perspectives from the higher education landscape. So thank you for your contributions. I think we move for the concluding session back in seminar room 8. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody online.